So with that, I'd like to introduce the moderator of our first panel, Representative Stan McLean. Representative McLean was first elected in 2016. He's currently the deputy whip. And it's really hard for me to not call him Commissioner McLean. We've known each other for a number of years, and he cares deeply about his community. I asked him if there was any particular thing he'd like me to share as I introduced him. And he said, well, the greatest legislator ever, I can say the greatest for the Marion County area. Certainly, please welcome Representative Stan McLean.
Well, good afternoon. It's a privilege for me to be here and to be able to moderate this first panel discussion that will be water utility challenges and opportunities. We have a lot of great folks that'll be sitting on this, moderating this, and so I'd like to introduce them. And as I do, I guess they can come up. Then first is Greg Munson, Lisa Wilson Davis, Kevin Carter, Monica, sorry, I can't see, Autry, and Todd Swingle. And they'll be discussing water utility challenges and opportunities that'll be facing Florida over the next many decades. Good afternoon. Yeah, there you go. Nice round of applause. So the way it's kind of set up, each of them have some remarks that they're gonna make and some things that they'll talk about, and so I'm gonna let them do that. And as long as they don't get outside the bumpers, or if John doesn't give them the shepherd's crook, then we'll be okay. Take it away.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Representative McLean. And so what we're hoping for this morning, you've got, well, I guess let me just do some basic overview here. All these folks are utility directors in their home areas. Say that, Lisa?
I just got promoted.
Oh, good. Okay. There we go. Sorry. So, and so they've got that hat, but we're also here. All of us are connected in one way or another as members, officers, hired help with the Florida section of the American Water Works Association. And so the topic that we're on this morning, the challenges and opportunities facing water utilities, we're going to be kind of wearing both of those hats. And I think probably more than anything else, what we really want to have today is more of a discussion. And so while you'll see a few slides, we've tried to be fairly selective about those. And while each of the speakers are going, just to keep this interesting, I and maybe Representative McLean and maybe other folks are going to be jumping in there to try to keep everybody on their toes. So nobody's going to be allowed to go to sleep. And we're going to try to make this more like a discussion because you've got the four folks here are coming from across the state. They've got tons of experience. And so I think just listening to them talk about what they do and the challenges they're facing are a wealth of information. We didn't finish any of our practice calls in less than about 90 minutes. Don't worry, John. We're going to do better than that today, wherever you are. But nonetheless, that's the level of discussion that we're sort of hoping for. So I won't delay things. It may be helpful because I'm not sure. As you begin talking, go ahead and introduce both hats, if you would. Explain to folks who you are and under both of your hats. And I think we can probably just start in from there. Again, there's going to be a rough sequence. Monica's going to start for us. And she is going to talk in general about water quality issues. That's a topic that's been on all of our minds. And with that, Monica, I'll turn it over to you.
Great.
Briefly.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As you said, I'm Monica Autry. I am a registered professional engineer in the state of Florida, but also I'm the operations manager for Destin Water Users, which is up in the panhandle of Florida. So as part of this panelist, I'm kind of representing the Northwest Florida contingent. I also serve as a secretary on the Utility Council for Florida Section AWWA and been very active. So today we'd like to talk to you about a couple little water quality issues that have come up across the press lately, I'll say, and things that might be on the forefront. First, we'll start out with some lead and copper issues, some algae cyanotoxins, and then also the famous PFOA, PFOS issue that's been around the state. So The first one we want to bring up is lead and copper. Most of you know that it probably does have some health issues related to it. One of the things that has been in the news lately, I think you probably have seen most recently, would be an issue up in Newark, New Jersey, where they're actually talking about lead and copper that being found and having to provide bottled water for their constituents. And that's definitely a concern for water utilities. We all actually do monitor lead and copper as required by DEP, and that's not real prevalent in all areas of Northwest Florida. And so I think that's part of some of the discussion we wanted to have this morning. Actually, in our utility, we don't really have any issues with that, but I know there are some other issues in the state of Florida. One of the other topics, too, is coming before us might be schools and filtering the water for schools, and concerns there about schools being built historically that might have the potential for lead and copper issues for children who are there, and filters, who would install them, who would maintain them, are they being maintained properly? These are some of the issues around lead and copper right now that are in the media, both here in the state of Florida as well as throughout the United States. So.
Yeah, well, and on lead and copper, we were talking about some of those earlier today, and I think most of the folks, the first time this popped onto the national awareness was probably with the problem they had in Flint, Michigan. And then, as you mentioned, Monica, back now in Newark, they're having problems with this again. And I'm sort of curious, we've got these two very big national headlines. I'd like to get the reaction of each of our panelists to their reaction. I'd like to hear when you as professionals heard about these stories in Flint and now in Newark. What were you telling yourself that, what was your reaction to these? And maybe you could share some of that and help us. And I'm going to start at the reverse end and pick on Kevin and have you all come this way.
Well, thank you, Greg, for picking on me. I like that. I think one of the first things was seeing, what went wrong there, and then what do we do right to make sure that it doesn't happen, for our local customers and within Broward County. And as an introduction, I work for Broward County's Water and Wastewater Services, and within the county we have 26 water providers, so over 20 cities. And what do we do to make sure that is not happening, within our utility? And one of the key things is we have a consistent, safe drinking water source within the county. We're very fortunate to have the Biscayne Aquifer in the Lower East Coast, and also all the methodologies and the testing that keep us professionally bringing that safe and reliable drinking water, and informing our customers, which we do through our reports and any questions and testing they may require.
You all do a lot of testing?
Yeah. Not too much. With lead copper, the testing is in the rule, and predominantly we're a relatively newer area, so we haven't had a lot of requests for that type of testing. But we do a lot of testing 24/7, 365 days a year to make sure that we have that consistent source of water and that it's being treated in the correct way.
Did anybody else want to chime in? I'm not going to force my questions on anybody but the first victim, but if you all want to chime in and add on to that, you're more than welcome to.
I just want to reiterate the point that Kevin made. Lisa Wilson Davis from the city of Boca Raton, which is also down in Southeast Florida. We have the same drinking water source, and I think that's one of when you look at Flint, Michigan, you do a root cause analysis, and they switch drinking water sources. And when you switch your drinking water source, there's it's the ripple effect. And I think that is important in Florida is, can this happen in Florida? We have stable drinking water sources. And if we do change, we do extensive studies before if you add an additional one. So I just want to reiterate that in Florida, we do test, but we do have stable drinking water sources. And I think that was the key. I just wanted to reiterate.
Sure.
And I'll just add that I think there's a slightly bigger piece as well, that it's not just lead and copper. We monitor and track and look for for many health-based contaminants that could be in water. And so one of the pieces is that it's very critical that we just look at lessons learned, whether that is how the issue arose, but also reactions and public information and communications. And really, when there are major events in our industry, I think all of us as utilities try to take very much of a lessons learned approach to see what went right, what went wrong, and how that could apply within our own operation.
Yeah, and thank you for that point too, because I mean that's one of the things I often see it. I need to be quiet, but I often see it in draft form. As a lawyer, I'll see a draft, permit from DEP. And what's shocking to me the first few times I saw them is just the pages and pages of things they have to monitor for and how specifically they're required to monitor for them. The detail and the thoroughness of those monitoring requirements that are in every one of these permits are kind of staggering until you and it helps you fully appreciate the thing, particularly very basic things like lead and copper, like you say, they've been around for a while, but they're just at the core of what everybody does. So I'm glad you brought out that point.
I'd just like to add too, I think there's a lot of best practices that need to be taken into consideration too. We do a lot of education to our constituents. I know we've actually worked with our school districts to ensure that the schools in our service area are safe, but also just, educating our ratepayers about how to flush your lines, take care of yourself, and just check things. A lot of that message has to get out to our customers, and I think we all do a really good job of getting that out as well.
Great. All right, I interrupted you. I've derailed you long enough.
That's all right. So next we're going to move on to kind of algae cyanotoxins. This is something of concern in the state of Florida right now. It has potentially different impacts to different parts around the state. We definitely want to make sure we know where there's algae, but then whether there are actually toxins available, because you can have the blue-green algae without the cyanotoxins. This is definitely something that is of concern to surface water treatment. It's not something of concern always to groundwater treatment, depending on where your source water comes from. We have about 20%, I think, of the state of Florida's volume of drinking water comes from surface water sources. So, relatively smaller section of the state has to deal with the algae situation and keeping an eye on it. But there are also a lot of other players in the algae. Could come from other sources, not just from, potentially wastewater. It could come from, let's see. It could come from,
Runoff?
Oh, yeah, runoff, sorry. Stormwater runoff, fertilization, anything that's the nutrients that would be needed there to have the algae grow. Warmer water climates, we're actually seeing that around the state too. Just warmer water will actually help feed that. So those are just some concerns that we all need to be cautious of, but also need to understand where some of those sources might be coming from and how we treat it. As far as a surface water treatment plant, most of them have the ability to treat this. I think we had some discussion yesterday about some potential odor and discoloration that might come with that. That doesn't necessarily mean your water is unsafe to drink, but there is some perception there. So those are just things that we as water utilities definitely take a look at. We always make sure we're educating our public in the area. And with that, I'll turn it to you.
Very good. Well, thanks, Monica. I'll tell you what, let's just keep rolling here because I think we had a good discussion there. And I want to go ahead and move on to, I think, Lisa, we plan to have you talk to us next. Do you want to do, that's right, we kind of skipped through that. Do you want to talk about, is it PFAS, PFOS, PFOS? What do you want to call it? And you want to go?
All of the above.
All of the above is a good way to describe it.
Okay. So you're going to start by telling us what they are, I hope, Monica.
Well, basically, these are some unregulated contaminants that we as utilities have been kind of monitoring through the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, the DEP. They do persist in a lot of different forms and where they come from. Most people, I think, right now are relating them to firefighting agents. They have been detected in some areas of the state of Florida, particularly around military bases or airfields where they might have been used in larger quantities. Again, this is kind of a surface water issue. It's something that has been applied to the ground that might show up in a shallow groundwater monitoring well or a shallow groundwater source or surface water. So this is just something to keep on the radar. We know people at both DEP and throughout the state are looking at how does this impact us. Testing, several years back, I think it was UCMR3, we did some preliminary testing. The detection limits weren't very low. I mean, they were actually kind of high. Science is trying to catch up to just see if there really is a health threat. Those are things that we're actually monitoring as utilities and looking forward to seeing what the science can tell us.
And I know from our discussions earlier that you all are tracking. It seems like this is going on at a national level and potentially the state level. Is this something that you all are tracking and paying attention to? Because it's kind of a cutting edge issue. I mean, there's not unlike, say, lead and copper, where we've got decades of established science. This is a relatively newer issue. Is this something that you all are tracking and looking at?
Absolutely. And I will say we're tracking it on the national level. How many bills are out there?
There's over 35 bills that have been filed in Congress over the last 3 to 4 months.
That contain something to do with PFOA, PFAS, whatever you want to call it. They're a large class. We are finding them. One of the things that I wanted to kind of communicate is that these compounds are not being generated by the water utilities. These are things that have been generated by humans in society and the products that we use. I will also say that where they have been identified in drinking water wells, those wells have been abandoned and moved on. And also there's utilities have put in treatment processes, activated carbon, things like that, to ensure that these are not being sent out into the potable water. So more to come. There's a lot of science. It is a newer thing, so that science as it develops, and we are definitely going to stay engaged on both the state and the national level.
Yeah, and I noticed this morning, I don't know if it was you all or there were other utilities in the room. We had a utility council meeting this morning, so we had a large number of members there. And they have gone out and they've tested wells, as Lisa said. Some have been closed if necessary. They've been tested typically near places where PFAS or PFASs would be expected, military sites, training grounds for firefighters. A lot of this is stemming, as Monica mentioned, with firefighting foam. So those sources, drinking water sources near there are getting attention, and people are working on this. And in fact, many of you, we will be at, and I know many of you are probably aware that Florida DEP is also taking a look at this as well. So it's a big topic, and worth mentioning that we're all paying attention to it.
Yeah, and just to build on that, Florida Department of Environmental Protection participation, they're actually hosting a meeting on it on September 12th. I believe the meeting's in Tallahassee, but it's going to be webinard. So that's in the afternoon. We can get you more information. Of course, representatives from the department are here today, too.
Very good. Okay, now, I think, really, it's Lisa's turn.
Right, yes.
And so, obviously, maybe if there's been one story that has, in Florida anyway, that has eclipsed some of the lead issues that are making national headlines, it's been sanitary sewer overflows. So in her capacity, both as the director of the Florida section of the American Water Works Utility Council and as the newly promoted...
You promoted me.
Oh, did I just promote you? She's the boss. So, I mean, I don't remember. She's the boss. And also in her capacity in Boca Raton, Lisa is a subject matter expert. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Lisa.
What a resume builder. You're a subject matter expert in sanitary sewer overflows. Okay.
Somebody has to
thank
do
you,
it.
Greg. And my actual title is Operations and Environmental Compliance Manager for the City of Boca.
You can see why I don't have that memorized.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to briefly touch on sanitary sewer
Lisa, approximately how many customers do you all serve?
We serve 130,000 in the city. So, and that's, thank you for asking, because you're going to see my next slide.
Oh, sorry, I
is-
jumped
No,
in.
I wasn't going to say that number, but it illustrates the point. Real quick, sanitary sewer collection system is a system that basically brings the wastewater from a home and a business back to a central wastewater plant. What I have up here is actually our GIS, a screenshot of our GIS of our sanitary sewer collection system in the city of Boca. I put that up because what most of you see is a bunch of green lines. You may be able to see some orange dots in there. What I see when I look at that is 10,158 manholes, 447 force main valves, 242 lift stations, and 706 miles of pipe with 37,000 points of entry into my system from homes and businesses. And when you look at it, you see it, you drive through the city of Boca, you will not see any of that because it's all underground. And that's what a sanitary sewer collection system is. It's a very complex system of valves, manholes, force mains, gravity mains, all bringing that sewer back to us. It's all underground, and we have 37,000 points of entry that we have absolutely no control of. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. Bringing that in that as a wastewater facility, and most of the AWWA Water Utility Council members are also wastewater facilities. That's why we're bringing this up, because this is a hot topic. It is our core duty to protect public health and the environment, and that's why we collect this wastewater. The sanitary sewer overflows occurs when something happens to one of any parts of this system. It could be people dump grease down their drains, and grease, yes, it'll flow down your drain. It gets to our system and it hardens and it becomes rock hard. It's like a brick that will cause the sewage to stop flowing and back up. Stormwater systems, our roadways are designed to convey, for us to put our infrastructure in so that we have easy access to them. They're also designed in stormwater systems to move the stormwater to those roadways to prevent flooding from homes and businesses. Well, when you move the stormwater, the excessive amounts of stormwater onto those roadways where our infrastructure is, we will have some infiltration. It will happen. And then our systems become overwhelmed, and we can have an SSO that way. It's unfortunate. There's a lot of damage done by people directional drilling. They'll try to put a line underneath the ground without open cutting. And so they'll directional drill, and your pipe could be this way, and they're going that way, and they tag you. That happens, unfortunately, more often than not. We can have mechanical failure. We can have power outage. Any one of those things would cause an SSO.
Did you mention blockages?
I mentioned blockages. Oh, and just
Go ahead.
thank
Yeah,
you. Not only grease, the wipes, the flushable, biodegradable wipes will actually help form that blockage with the grease. They also get into our lift stations, our pump stations that pump sewage and lift it down to carry it to us. They will get in those pumps and ruin our pumps. I've actually had to replace 3 in one area because of that. And roots from trees will get in and cause blockages as well. So, one of the things that we can do to help prevent SSOs, our best practices include pipeline inspections. These are just a bunch of pictures. We send a little TV camera down. When I look at these videos, sometimes get a little seasick, but because they tend to wobble, but you get a really good view of your pipeline. We can do smoke testing. We put smoke in. If there's any compromise in the pipe, the smoke will come out and you'll see it. When we find compromises in our infrastructure, manhole lining is one thing. You can see here the before and after. We also can line our pipes. This lining will extend the life of the pipe and or manhole for a minimum of 50 years. And then we can also slip line or pipe burst, actually insert another pipe inside or insert a pipe inside and burst the existing. So those are some of the things that we do to prevent these. The other thing that I want to touch on with SSOs, and Greg, you can interrupt me anytime you want, but is what we do when they happen.
And I do want to interrupt you. Thank
Okay.
you. But before we get to that, I mean, you mentioned a number of best practices here that you all perform, but I'm curious about the other panel members too. Are there things that you all are doing? I mean, given that there are so many things outside of your control, but you're still, doing your best to minimize the sewer overflows. I'm curious about, other best practices from you all. And is there any overall message that you would want, like if we're going to take away one message on preventing SSOs? What would that be? Todd, let me start with you. I'm going to jump in there.
Well, I can go ahead and add a few things. One, there's many best practices, and Lisa's hit on a few of them. we, like many other industries, are seeing the technology evolution, and there's many more things that are occurring. We're working now, and I think other utilities are as well, to use the data that comes from our lift stations so that we understand and can model flows to help target us in, to help find the spots where there might be problems, that there might be inflow or infiltration in that massive network of pipes. Because when those are all underground, until you go look at each one, it's hard to know where you might have a problem. And so you have to have very exhaustive programs to diagnose that. But using some data evolution to better target so that we're cost effectively pursuing these solutions. We're even using what are called smart balls. That is an interesting technology for ductile iron force mains, where a device is put inside of a pipe and it can detect gas bubbles that are in those mains that are likely to be the source of where corrosion could occur. So there's many different things that are occurring. And these are, I think one of the important messages that I have is twofold. One, you have massive amounts of infrastructure in the ground, and these are long-term solutions that we need to have. We need to be thinking in the long term. And Lisa talked to you about everyone plays a part. These sanitary sewer overflows have to do with the interrelationship with our stormwater systems, how we design those, how robust those are, the contract permitting systems for everyone else that is putting infrastructure inside the right-of-way that may hit a line and cause a blockage, businesses and homeowners that are contributing materials to our sewer. And then the utilities, obviously. We operate those, and we play a significant role in making sure that we have effective repair and replacement programs in place as well.
Any other messages? If you were going to send one message, y'all, about sanitary sewer overflows, anything, what's the takeaway point here from y'all? Anything else?
I think Todd nailed it. And, I think as for us, we do everything in our power to prevent them. I mean, it's, and when they do happen, this kind of segue into the next thing, we do respond immediately, and we are there until everything is back to normal. We, when an SSO occurs, my team knows everything else is put to the side, and we go out, we isolate that, we stop the flow as soon as possible. In a gravity main, it's a little easier. In a force main, because they're all interrelated, there's multiple valves. Todd mentioned about the contracting and permitting of when other people are putting in infrastructure. One of my frustrations is going out to find my valve and find out that, the neighborhood paved their road and they paved right over your valve, so good luck finding it. It's that type of thing that is very frustrating, but we do go out, we isolate, we do public notification when spills occur. We have door hangers we hang, we have signs we put up. We clean up the area. You can disinfect hard surfaces with HTH or a bleach type chlorine compound, and we put lime on the grassy areas to mitigate this. But everything we can do once they occur, we do to stop. The other thing we do is we have large vacuum trucks that can actually vacuum up portion, if not all of the spill, that we will do every effort to do that.
So I'm just, Representative McLean didn't know this was coming. I did not give him a heads up on this, but so you've kind of heard, this is our message here. This is something we want you to convey. So you're on the sort of the receiving end of this, as you will, both because I know your experience in local government, and now as a legislator. So if you had sort of one message yourself that you would want utilities and users to hear, what would yours be for us? I mean, you've obviously got quite a bit of experience in the infrastructure area.
So I think there's probably two parts to this. One is, for the most part, the utility functions at 100% most of the time. You have 34,000 points of entry or whatever it is. It's difficult to manage that. I think part of the bigger discussion that took place after Hurricane Irma was about SSOs and that kind of thing. And I think there's a movie, RV, if you've ever seen it. There's a guy about to make a big mess up, and the guy says it's just a matter of simple hydraulics, right? If your lift station's underwater, it can't pump anything anywhere. If your lift station's underwater, it probably doesn't have any power to it. even if you have a backup generator, it's probably underwater too. And so I think part of the conversation that took place in Tallahassee after Irma was about some of these SSOs. Why did they happen? Some of it was just a matter of simple hydraulics. Things were underwater. Things don't work when they're underwater, especially, if they're electric or if they have a hydraulic part to them where they're trying to pump water out of water. You can't do that. And so I think that's one of the things I tried to impress upon my fellow legislators was the thought process that these things are underground. They're trying to pump something above ground that's covered with water, and that can't happen. And so therefore, then the utility has to make another decision and say, but I have all this wastewater. What am I going to do with it? You have to get rid of it somehow. And therefore, I'm assuming you probably did outfall. I'm assuming you probably went to outfall at that point, and some others had to do some other things. But you have to find a way to get that waste out of there and get it moving. And so, but anyway, so those are probably my 2 points. And again, for the most part, utilities run pretty smooth most of the time till human error happens. And but for the most part, utilities are always on top of things.
Thank you. And Greg?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the discussion on that. I have kind of sidestepped us. So I know you were talking, and that's a perfect segue because we're talking about underwater. We got a tropical storm headed our way. And I know, Lisa, you were going to talk a little bit, I think, about hurricane response as well.
I'll touch on the hurricane response, and then I'll kind of wrap this up. But, the hurricanes and the storms, and thank you, that was kind of perfect
I knew you
segue.
wanted to go there, so I'm taking you there.
Perfect segue.
Honestly, that was unrehearsed.
And, again, I mentioned, stormwater roads are there for the right of way for us to put our utility. Stormwater systems are designed to move the water to the roads to keep it away. So but then the stormwater system in a hurricane, the trees come down and block their outfalls. So that backs it up. I mean, it's that, again, that ripple effect. And when we were talking on one conference call, I don't know how many of you have young children or have ever read the book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. And there's a whole series of them. If you give a mouse a cookie, then he's going to want a glass of milk, then he's going to need a napkin, and so on and so on. It's the same thing. It's this complex thing. And with hurricanes, it's extremely challenging. I mentioned when an SSO occurs and we're notified of it, we respond immediately. In hurricane storm conditions, we're sitting back. And unfortunately, we can't respond at that point. It is not safe for us to go out and respond. That's one of the unique challenges during a hurricane. After the hurricane passes, trying to get to some of your infrastructure because of flooding, down trees, down power lines, it frustrates us because we're used to being able to respond and get there. So those are unique challenges during these storm conditions, Greg, that we face. And we try to pre-deploy generators. But if a Cat 4 or 5 is coming, right now I'm on the fence. Am I going to deploy generators or am I going to hold them back? Because I don't know the intensity of the storm that's going to hit me. 3 or lower, I'm going to deploy. 4 or higher, I'm going to hold them and safeguard them because if I put them out, they'll be gone when I go out there. So those are the challenges that we deal with. So, and just, I'd kind of like to emphasize that our successes are that we do treat 1.5 billion gallons of wastewater a day. That is enough waste, and it goes through pipes that would go around the earth 10.5 times every day. And when we do have these releases, which are less than 1% of our total volume, we do respond and mitigate. We believe in the implementation of DEP science-based water restoration programs, such as their TMDLs. We have not touched on, but there's another couple panels in the forum coming up on water reuse. We are number 1 in the nation. And we, as utilities, support our asset management programs and the expansion of those to ensure we minimize these. So,
very good. Thank you, Lisa. And I've mentioned one of the associations here, the Florida section of the American Water Works Association Utility Council. I did not mention, and all of these folks are also either officers or members of the wastewater side of the operation as well, and the FWEA. So you can ask that these are folks who are qualified to talk about water supply and wastewater as well. And if you have legal questions, you can talk to David Childs, who helps them with that. I only do one half of that with them. So anyway, so with that, we're going to go back to more of a water supply, drinking water side with Todd. And Todd is, I'll probably get your title wrong. I think of you as the boss of the Toho Water Authority. I guess you probably have a board, but I think of you as the boss.
I definitely have a board.
Okay, well, there you go. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about water quantity and water supply, which are not as topical in the news, at least not right now. Wait till we have another drought, and then it'll be back in the news. And talk about, but it's an ongoing issue for everybody, for all of the utilities, and making sure that when you turn the faucet, you're going to have water come out in the future.
So my title is Executive Director of the Toho Water Authority. If you look at our org chart, I'm actually third on the org chart because we do have a board, and then at the top of our org chart is our customer, because that is who we take serious. That is ultimately who we report to, and we are in Central Florida. We're a growing area, and certainly water supply is a challenge that we face. One of the things I wanted to talk about just briefly is water perceptions. And with the storm coming, we're going to live up to what many people think of Florida as being a very wet state. But as Greg mentioned, then until we're not, we have drought conditions. And one of the challenges that we face is that perception issue. Our planning cycles are very, very long, and water supply development is very long, on the order of decades. We go through multiple cycles of wet times and dry times, and that does present part of the challenge, because if we're in a wet time and getting water supply, then public perception supports that. During drought periods, it's a little different. Many of us, and you heard some statistics about throughout the state, have used some form of groundwater, which has served the state very well. You can see just from some of the pictures, we have water underlying us pretty much everywhere. And that storage is huge for utilities because it allows us some of that resiliency and very much helps in our supply planning. And whether it's the Floridan here in Central Florida or the Biscayne or the Hawthorne and other areas. But we're now in an area where we also not only have responsibility to our customers, we very much have responsibility to the environment as well. And as we start looking at future water supplies, we're moving into a lot more diversification of those supplies, and that adds a lot of complexity to our strategies. One of the things I'd like you to keep in the back of your mind as well is that we can fix a lot of problems if we throw dollars at it, but in the end, we are also an essential public health service, and we've got poverty issues in areas of the state, and maintaining affordable water services is absolutely critical as we start to think about supplies as well. We have a long history of successes as utilities as well. The graph you see here, as you can see that over time and over the last over 20 years, we've seen continual declines in the per capita water usage. In many utilities that even despite significant periods of growth have been able to maintain production levels because of these investments, both in conservation practices, working with demand reduction, whether it's high efficiency fixtures or landscape practices, working closely with our customers for behavioral modifications, irrigation restrictions, inclining block rates to be able to send that pricing signal, customer engagement, just talking with our customers about the actions that they can have, very similar, tied back over to the SSO side. How our customers interact with us is a very important piece, and that is an active part of most utilities. And then deployment of alternatives such as reclaimed water, which has been very successful throughout the state, and particularly here in Central Florida, where the vast majority of utilities, their primary method of handling their wastewater discharges is through beneficial reuse. And on that reuse note, it's one of the key themes that I'd like to walk away with as well is that our strategies evolve, and they're also very complex, and reuse is a great example of that. When it was first deployed and coming to fruition in the state back in the 80s, it was a wastewater management solution. It was managing disposal. But very quickly that evolved into agricultural uses and groundwater recharge. With the continual development in the state, we've seen that move over into the retail space. We have parks, we have industry. You're seeing a continual evolution of that. Over the last years, you're also seeing that evolution to recognition of reuse as a very much the same resource that our water supply is, our traditional groundwater supplies. That's why you see many utilities that have deployed the same type of block rate structures on their reclaim systems that they are on potable, and applying very much the same irrigation restrictions on reclaim that are on potable. You have to bear in mind, though, each utility needs flexibility because their situations are different. Some may be in a position where their disposal opportunities allow them to manage reclaim very much like potable. Others need that flexibility based on that growing customer base to still be able to address reclaim and get rid of wastewater, because that is an ongoing operational need.
Let me just step in there, because you've already hit on the point. I mean, it varies from utility to utility, and obviously you're talking about how it's changed over time. I'd like to get some other geographic perspectives on water conservation and how that's changed over time and by geography, or by utility for that matter. So if any of you all want to jump into that and just sort
I'll
of
be happy to mention just in Northwest Florida, we had some working with the Water Management District. We actually have created some regional water supply initiatives, and a lot of the coastal communities have actually created inland well fields that should last us through our build-out populations when they were designed, and we reevaluate that every 5 years just to make sure. So we have looked at alternative water supplies, and for the coastal communities up in the Panhandle, kind of going mid-county to North County has been able to provide us a sustainable resource for drinking water. And then on the reclaim water side, since you mentioned that, we actually started doing reclaim water at Destin Water Users in 1985, which is pretty a long history of reclaim water. But we're a peninsular island. We had no place to discharge our reclaim water. We now have customers wanting reclaim water, and we don't have enough to give. We're currently working on expansions of our reclaim water, and what that helps do is abandon some of the shallow groundwater wells to keep that groundwater available for other customers for irrigation. So there is kind of a balance of the water cycle that goes on for utilities, both from the drinking water side and the reclaim water side.
anybody else?
I would mention partnerships as far as conservation has worked real well for us in Broward County. As I mentioned previously, we have over 26 water providers that serve 2 million people and 10 million tourists a year. And so for us all to work together under the umbrella of our environmental agency, working on different conservation practices, and we also partner with the Florida Yards and Neighborhoods programs, South Florida Water Management District, doing these conservation techniques where we give people refunds for putting in proper shower heads and toilets. So working collectively, the 26 utilities have really made a difference in our per capita.
I appreciate it. And the reason I like to ask that question is when I was at DEP, I had a bit of a learning curve on that one. I would have this mindset of, hey, water conservation, it's always a good thing. Let's just go in there and create a series. We were going to create a toolbox, and every utility was going to have to pick from the toolbox. And what we found is the geographic and the economic, all the various factors that go in there are so broad, wide-ranging that it almost becomes an impossible task. When you look at, Todd, your district's a great example. You probably don't know off the top of your head, but you've got like tens of thousands of hotel rooms, right, in your district, as I recall. I mean,
We have an extensive amount of hotel as well as just vacation homes and rentals, and so the nature of our community is very diverse throughout our service area.
So, if Todd goes in and starts providing incentive funds for low-flow toilets, he's going to have a much different impact than, say, somebody who's out there in a very rural area where, the toilets just aren't the issue, but maybe irrigation is if they've got homes, or sprinklers, or agricultural irrigation. There's all sorts of things that go into this in a state that's as broad and diverse as ours. Well, anyway, with that, I've kind of derailed you there a little bit.
No, but actually,
Todd.
I think I really appreciate it, because that really does lead to the takeaway for this, which is that flexibility and those partnerships are what is absolutely key. We have different areas of the state. We have different utilities. We have different resources. As our water strategies, supply strategies get more and more complex, that operational flexibility to meet the needs of the communities is very critical. There are long histories throughout the state, whether it's Conserve 2 between Orange County and OUC, or the current project that some of our partners are working on with Cypress Lake, which is a brackish alternative supply, or Taylor Creek. But you're also seeing it where over the last decade, we're starting to really get to the point we need to be at, where it's utilities and environmental groups and regulatory communities working together. We have the Central Florida Water Initiative that is trying to recognize that we need some predictability, because we're investing in infrastructure that is tens or hundreds of millions of dollars and has life cycles that, in order to keep that rates adequate for lower income populations and to meet this basic health need, we need to see those life cycles of 30 and 40 and 50 years to be able to get those payback periods. And the only way we can do that is working together with regional partnerships, with regulatory partnerships, and really thinking about that flexibility for the future. And that is the key to really, I think, all of the topics that we're dealing with today.
And I just want to hit on one point you just made. I'm going to be quick because I know we're going to run short on time. So I'm going to ask for the sort of the quick answer round for this from everybody. Todd mentioned the long planning horizons that he's on. Give us a sense of what's your planning horizon when you start looking at water supply? Give us a sense. How far down the road are you all looking?
Up in the Panhandle, we're looking probably about 20 years. We're anticipating build out in the 2040s.
Okay.
Our strategic plan, we're launching a 50-year water supply plan.
We look for 20 to 50 year.
Yeah, the same. I'll be talking about a project in just a second. We're looking out to 26.
So if you're like me and you're having trouble thinking past breakfast tomorrow, imagine what these folks are trying to make, the predictions they're trying to make over the next 50 years. Anyway, with that, we're running short on time, and I want to leave time for questions from the representative or the audience. So Kevin, I'm going to ask you to hit the gas.
Absolutely.
And I'll try to stay out of the way.
Yeah, well, actually, talking about resilience, we've actually been talking about resilience, if you think about it, for the last 45 minutes. Because for utilities, resilience is inherent because we provide a service 24/7 and 365 days a year. And since our industry started, we've had to adapt and learn along the way to be resilient to change and to help sustain our future. I see a lot of familiar faces out there. How many of you were here last year when I think one of the first times talked about resiliency? That's one of the great things about this forum. It's a continuing a conversation. So what I'm going to do here in just the next few minutes is talk about resilience as far as what some partnerships are doing, what different utilities have really done since I had a chance to visit with you last year, and where's it go?
Green.
Oh, the big green one. That
Big
makes
green
sense.
button.
And so I went to the headlines to kind of give us a platform just to think about the different risk and solutions, the challenges that we have when it comes to resilience. And one of the things in South Florida that the three major periodicals, Palm Beach Post, Sun Sentinel, and Miami Herald, partnered with our local public radio. And they formed, and if you have your Google out there, it's the Invading Seas. They, for the last year and a half, have brought together experts around the world on all things with resilience and climate change and sea level rise. And so for the drinking water community in South Florida, throughout our coastal zone, and our economic viability, the rising sea threatens our drinking water source. I talked at the beginning of this panel about how nice it is to have a safe, consistent drinking water source. But that's going to change. Our boundaries are changing as the sea encroaches. We get our drinking water from about 100 feet down in the ground in South Florida. That saltwater edge is coming in. So what's the solution to that? Well, partnerships, we're working across 4 counties. If you go over to the editorial there, the first one from the Miami Herald, the Southeast Florida Sea Level Rise Compact is a model for other regions. Conversations lead to solutions. And importantly, with our Southeast Florida Compact, it gives us the political will and the ability to work not just with environmental and water resource experts, but the business community, as they know that their future and their ability to work and live in South Florida is so important that we're going to come to some solutions on these problems. And building a little bit on Todd's topic and thanking one of our Florida Forum sponsors, Florida Trend, I figured I'd look at one of their articles.
Bonus points.
Yes. But this is actually an excellent article that was put out last November. And I'm not going to go into the topics that Todd mentioned as far as where's our water coming from or where is it going. But in South Florida, another solution to the rising sea is working with regional water projects. And many of you that follow the legislature have heard of the C-51 reservoir. And that is a project where we're going to be working with water from Palm Beach, a reservoir in central Palm Beach County, and bringing water throughout the lower East Coast that will help keep our water levels in our canal systems to help abate sea level rise as long as we can and enhance our alternative water supplies. And then a risk that you may not relate to water utilities, but cybersecurity. It's everywhere. And any of you have ever had a chance to sit down with your IT people, no matter what industry you're in, and see the rapid microseconds that everyone around the world that's into this is trying to get into your systems, wreak havoc. It is truly our next, one of our biggest challenges going forward. And when your city, it wasn't my city, but one of our Florida cities actually made the New York Times they were actually held hostage for $600,000. And so we have a new law. It's called if you look to the solution, actually a regulation where utilities are now including cybersecurity in our risk assessments and our resiliency planning. Just a couple of programs that we didn't talk about last year. Next to me, Lisa has this innovative sustainable infrastructure program. City of Tampa has PIPES. We have these programs. We got to come up with a better branding in Broward County. We call them utility analysis zones. So we're going to get back to our marketing people. And then I always show this picture from Miami-Dade County's hardening and heightening, kind of the extreme, if you will, for resiliency. But they're out on a coastal island. That building in the background with the red arrow, that's the former roof of a chlorine building, and the one where it says new, the steps are where the old roof was. So that kind of puts it, that's our pictures, 1,000 words.
Kevin, you got
Well, yeah.
Last
5
one,
seconds.
yep, and
John's
partnerships,
walking around, so you're-
partnerships. Resilient Utility Coalition, you can read in those. And Florida 2040 is one of the Florida's section of the American Water Works initiatives, and resiliency is one of our forefront issues. So we can talk in the hallways. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. They did a great job, touched a lot of tough topics.
And please, thank you to Representative McLean for helping us get through all this today.
Thank you.